Adisebaba. Adisebaba fairy tales and bedtime stories for kids. The Ox and the Frog. Once upon a time, there was a little ox living in the farm by a lake. This little ox was very unhappy because he was much smaller than all the other oxes in the farm. He always complained about it. And yes, once again, he was complaining to his friend, the dog.
I am the smallest ox on the farm. In fact, I am sure that I am the smallest in the world. And there's nothing I can do to change this.
Don't start again, my friend. You're actually, in fact, a pretty big, clever, and cute ox. It's impossible for us all to be the same size, right?
Yes, we don't have to be all the same size. But why am I not the biggest?
Look, I am not the biggest dog in the world. I am sure that somewhere there's a bigger dog than me, but I do not worry about this. I am happy with who I am.
But I am not.
In the lake right next to the farm where our unhappy ox lived, there lived a very self-centered frog. This frog loved to brag about himself next to his friends. He was bigger than all the other frogs, and he was proud of this.
I am the biggest frog in this lake. And whoever is the biggest is the king. From now on, everybody has to call me my king. There is no rule that says the biggest will be the king.
And actually, we don't need a king.
Why not? Every place has a king. For example, the lion is the king of the jungle.
Yes, but the lion is not the biggest animal in the jungle. There is the elephant, for example.
Our self-centered frog had to think about his answer, and then answered back, bragging as always.
This is not the jungle, and you are not elephants. I am the king, and that is it.
The other frogs had talked amongst themselves. They had to teach this frog a lesson, but they didn't know what to do. One day, when the frogs were swimming in the lake, they saw the ox eating away sadly on the other side of the lake. Never in their life had they seen an animal this big.
Wow, what a big animal.
Right at that moment, they thought of an idea.
Well, doesn't our self-centered frog say that the biggest animal is the king? Then this must be the king.
The frogs immediately went next to the ox. They told him about the situation and asked for help.
Yes, but I'm just a little ox. What can I do for you?
Little who, you?
You won't need to do a thing. We will bring a friend of ours that is very much in love with himself, and you leave the rest up to us.
Okay, but now I have to get back to the farm, or the farmer will worry.
The following day, the frogs went over next to the frog that was very much in love with himself. They mentioned that there was a giant animal on the other side of the lake.
He wants to see you.
Okay then, let's go over and see who this giant animal is.
The frogs went over to the other side of the lake. The ox was waiting for them on the edge of the lake. The frog, who was very much in love with himself, almost swallowed his small tongue, but did not make anything obvious to his friends.
So, you're the giant that wants to be the king of this lake.
The ox wanted to say something, but in a hurry, the female frog answered.
Weren't you the one that said whoever is the biggest will be king? Seeing as though the ox is bigger, then it's his right to be king.
Oh yeah? I can be as big as him?
Right. And how so?
When the frogs were talking amongst themselves, the self-centered ox thought of himself to be super big and worthy, because this was the first time someone was mentioning how big he was.
Now you will see how I will grow.
And so the frog began to inflate.
Am I as big as the ox?
The frog inflated himself a little bit more.
What do you think? Am I as big as the ox?
The frog began to inflate himself once again. Now he was not able to talk. He could only stare with his eyes, waiting for assurance. All the other frogs began to laugh.
No, you couldn't do it, man.
No, you're not that big.
Inflate a little more.
The frog continued to inflate. He inflated and turned into a balloon. With his amazed gaze, the ox stared at the frog. The very inflated frog had blown up so big he no longer looked like a frog. He pushed so hard that eventually he began to float and started to go up. Eventually, he reached as high as the ox, but he needed to pass the ox. With some more effort, he blew up a bit more and went higher. And Ox and the frogs just stood there, staring.
This was a very tough lesson.
They were all really sad about what had happened to the frog, who thought of himself to be bigger than anyone else. And so, after seeing all that had happened, never ever did the little ox complain again. He accepted himself as he is and was happy with it. Once upon a time, there lived a beautiful princess in a big castle. One day, her father the king gave her a golden ball as a birthday present.
Happy birthday, my daughter.
Thank you, Father. The princess loved this golden ball. She started to spend all her time playing with it in the garden. One day, she went out with her ball and started to play with it, tossing it around. The princess came next to a little pond and kept on playing with the ball. Right at that moment, she could not catch the ball after she tossed it in the air, and the ball started to roll away. My ball! The princess ran after her golden ball, but the ball got faster and faster. Finally, the ball fell in the pond and sank into the deep waters. Oh no! The princess sat down next to the pond and desperately started to cry. My beautiful golden ball! How am I going to bring it back? Suddenly, she heard a voice.
Ribbit.
My beautiful princess, why are you crying?
Ribbit.
She looked around but could not figure out where the voice was coming from. When she looked closely, she realized that the voice was coming from the frog that was right next to the pond, looking at her. The frog leaped towards the princess and asked again after he got closer.
What's wrong, my beautiful princess? Why are you crying?
The princess got stunned when she saw a talking frog. A talking frog? How can that be?
Well, here I am, talking beautiful princess. Now tell me, why are you crying?
Coming back to herself, the princess started to tell her story. The golden ball that my father gave me fell in the pond. It's already at the bottom. How am I going to get it back? The frog came next to her feet and made an offer.
My beautiful princess, I will bring back your ball, but in return I will need you to do me a favor.
The princess was curious. So what's the favor?
If you accept to be friends with me, I would like to live with you in the castle.
The princess thought about it and then accepted his offer. So the frog jumped in the water and went out of sight. A while later, he appeared with the golden ball and threw it to the princess. Reunited with her ball, the princess happily started to walk back to the castle. Seeing the princess leaving the frog behind, Frog yelled after her.
My beautiful princess, you forgot me. You promised to take me with you to the castle. Ribbit.
The princess yelled out from afar, laughing. How can an ugly frog like you even imagine to live with a beautiful princess like me?
Ribbit.
The princess left the frog right there and went back to her castle. In the evening, the king, queen and the princess sat down at the dinner table. Right when they were starting to eat, they heard a knock on the door. The maid told them that a frog had arrived and told them that he was invited by the princess and asked permission to come in. The king, surprised, asked his daughter,
Would you like to tell us what's going on, my daughter?
Well, Daddy. The princess told all about what happened that morning at the pond.
If you gave a promise to the frog to save your bowl, then you must keep your word for it.
The king ordered the maid to welcome the frog inside. A while later, the door opened and the little frog came in leaping and stopped next to the dinner table.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, my king, for allowing me in.
With one big jump, the frog landed next to the princess's plate. He looked at her, unhappy. The king ordered a plate for the frog, but the frog stopped it.
No need for a plate. I can eat from the princess's plate.
The frog started to eat from her plate. The princess was really upset with him, but she thought that he would leave after the dinner anyway, and didn't say anything. But the frog had no intentions to leave after the dinner. When she left the table, he followed the princess to her room. Time passed and the frog got sleepy.
My princess, I'm really sleepy. I'd like to sleep in your bed if you don't mind.
Afraid to upset her father, the princess had to say yes to that too. The frog jumped on her bed and put his head on her soft pillow. Trying not to show her anger, the princess laid next to the frog and slept. In the morning, the frog woke the princess up.
Good morning, my beautiful princess. I have one more wish from you. If you do that, I will leave right away.
Hearing that the ugly frog would leave soon, without making it obvious, the princess was extremely happy. All right, shoot. What is it now?
I want you to kiss me, my princess.
The princess jumped out of her bed furiously. How dare you! That is impossible! The smile on the frog's face disappeared, and instead a teardrop ran down his cheek. The princess thought for a while. Oh well, what's the big deal with one tiny kiss? Evidently, I won't see him ever again. And so she gave him a kiss. As soon as she kissed the frog, a bright white light covered the room. Due to the light, the princess couldn't see anything. After a short while, the light disappeared. The princess started to see again, but this time she could not believe her eyes. Right where the frog was standing a moment ago, there was a very handsome man instead. The princess was stunned with what she was seeing. She couldn't believe her eyes, and so she asked, "Who are you? What happened to the frog standing here?"
My beautiful princess, I am the prince of a land far away. The evil witch cast a spell on me and turned me into a frog. To break the spell, I had to spend one night next to a princess and get a kiss from her. Thanks to you, I am safe from being a frog forever.
The princess was very surprised, but also very happy with what she heard. They both went next to the king and told him all about it.
This should be the second lesson the frog has taught you, my dear daughter. We should not evaluate anyone by only their looks and judge without knowing the whole truth about them.
The king hosted the prince for a few more days in his castle. The prince and the princess came next to the pond where they first met.
My princess, will you marry me and come with me to my kingdom?
The princess smiled and nodded, accepting the prince's offer. And right at that moment, a sound broke the silence.
Ribbit, ribbit.
They turned and looked where the sound came from. There was a frog next to the pond, looking at them. They held their breath and waited for him to talk. But it didn't happen. They both started laughing.
Don't worry, little froggy. I'm sure you too will find your princess one day.
And laughed a little more. After a short while, they got married and lived happily ever after.